Welcome. Today we're taking a close look at a truly monumental figure in the world of video games. We're going to be tracing a career that really spans two different eras of game development and the founding of, well, not one, but two huge industry-defining studios. We're focusing on the professional journey, some of the personal details, and the sudden and tragic passing of Vincent Walter Zampella II, a major American video game designer and executive whose work just fundamentally shaped the modern first-person shooter.
Yeah, and when you look at all the material we have, what you see is this portrait of a visionary who was, defined by this huge creative ambition, but also an absolute demand for autonomy. Zampella's influence is just staggering. I mean, we are talking about the main creative force behind generations of these cinematic adventure games and high-stakes shooters. His work goes all the way from the early successes of Medal of Honor to creating the global giant that is the Call of Duty franchise. And then, in a way that defied all expectations, he did it again. He pivoted to launch modern titans like Apex Legends and the really successful Star Wars Jedi series. So what we can do is trace this career that was marked by just towering creative success, but also, and this is maybe just as important, by these huge, very public corporate battles that really set new precedents.
Right. So our goal today is to really unpack this massive story. We need to look at Zampella's professional life, his personal life, drawing on the facts from the sources, and then reflect on the industry's response to his death, which was, undeniably emotional and unified. We will approach this with total respect and impartiality, especially when we talk about the sensitive facts surrounding his passing. So let's start at the beginning. If you only see the executive Zampella, you might miss just how unconventional his path really was.
That's the perfect place to start. His professional story is not, someone climbing the usual corporate ladder.
Okay, so let's get into this journey. When you think of the creative lead on billion-dollar franchises, you don't really picture someone who started outside of that whole tech ecosystem. Vincent Walter Zampella II was born on October 1st, 1970, and the sources highlight a really interesting detail right at the start of his education: an unsuccessful enrollment at Broward College. That specific phrase, unsuccessful enrollment, it just sets a very surprising stage for everything that came after.
It's so telling. I mean, it suggests he wasn't really aligned with the traditional academic path, which, often points to someone who wants to learn by doing. And after that attempt at college, his first job was as a handyman. His way into the gaming world, the field he would completely reshape, wasn't some grand plan. A friend got him a job at a local game company. And his duties were really at the ground level, answering phones and testing new games. It's the absolute definition of starting at the bottom.
And yet his rise from that point was incredibly fast. It suggests he just had this strong natural aptitude for the development side of things. We have a pretty clear timeline, starting with his work in graphic design and digital video at a company called GameTech. Then he makes a big move to Atari to help launch its PC division. And this is all before 1997. This shows someone who was, actively and successfully moving towards bigger roles, from support to actually shaping how a company was structured.
And crucially, that whole period was less about one single creative project and more about making the connections that would define his entire career. He spent time at companies that were really key in the mid to late 90s, places like Panasonic Interactive Media, which owned Ripcord Games, and also Segasoft. It was during those years that he first met Jason West, and that connection was, without a doubt, the most important professional relationship of Zampella's life. It led to them co-founding two massive studios, Infinity Ward and then Respawn Entertainment, along with their early partner, Grant Collier.
It's just fascinating that this powerhouse partnership started not in the middle of some huge project, but just, in the day-to-day work of the late 90s gaming scene.
Then the sources track a really strategic move he made. In 1999, Zampella moves from Silicon Valley, the tech hub, all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to work for a company called 2015 Inc. And this move, it quickly boosted his professional standing. By 2001, he was the director of development there. Yeah, that move, outside of the traditional Silicon Valley world, to a really focused studio like 2015 Inc., that turned out to be the catalyst for his first huge industry-defining work. He stayed there through 2002, and during that time, he was the lead designer for the critically acclaimed Medal of Honor, Allied Assault. And that title, released in 2002, wasn't just a success. It fundamentally changed what people expected from a World War II shooter.
It really did. For those of us who played those early Medal of Honor games, what was it specifically that Zampella's team did that made us feel for the very first time like we were really in World War II combat?
Well, the sources point to a few key things that he really pushed for. First, Allied Assault was one of the first shooters to borrow its language directly from big war movies, specifically saving Private Ryan. The D-Day Omaha Beach level is the most famous example. Before that, shooters had sort of abstracted combat, but Zampella's team made it feel visceral, chaotic, and cinematic. The sense of scale, the sound design, all the scripted events that were designed to make you, the player, feel like you were just one small part of this massive, overwhelming operation. That whole commitment to high drama, linear storytelling, it just set a completely new standard. It was about the experience, not just, simple arcade action.
Okay, so that critical success set the stage, but it also created a corporate problem. After the huge reception for Allied Assault, the sources say Zampella kept working on more Medal of Honor projects for a bit. But then Electronic Arts, the publisher, they made a strategic call that ended up being a huge catalyst for a major shift in the industry and in Zampella's career.
Right, and this is where Zampella's, his demand for creative control really starts to show. Electronic Arts decided they wanted to bring all Medal of Honor development in-house. They wanted to tighten their control over the IP. But that decision basically told Zampella, West, and Collier that their future was somewhere else if they wanted to stay independent. So instead of just joining the internal EA machine, they got financing and founded their own studio, Infinity Ward.
And that transition was just so audacious. What was Infinity Ward's very first project? The sources are very specific about this. They took a deal with Activision to create a new game codenamed MOH Killer. That project, born directly out of the conflict with their old publisher, became the original Call of Duty.
You couldn't make up the irony. They went from defining the Medal of Honor franchise to immediately turning around to compete directly against it. And the success of that first Call of Duty was immediate. It prompted Activision to move incredibly fast. Shortly after the game's release, they bought Infinity Ward completely. That deal included Zampella and Jason West signing these long-term employment contracts with Activision, which seemed to really cement their partnership and give them creative control over what would become the biggest military shooter franchise in the industry.
And under that leadership, they delivered these immense genre-defining hits, games that just completely overshadowed the competition. We're talking about Call of Duty 2 and then the revolutionary Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, which just changed the entire industry's direction. And that was followed by the huge sales success of Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2. They built a creative engine that was the single biggest moneymaker for their publisher.
To really get their impact, you have to look closely at Code 4, Modern Warfare. The sources really emphasize that Zampella's team made two revolutionary choices. First, they moved the setting away from World War II, which was a very saturated market, to a contemporary fictional conflict. That move gave them more creative freedom with weapons and story. Second, and this was even more critical for the console audience, they introduced the idea of persistent progression.
That detail is so important. That whole system of unlocks, perks, the prestige grind, it turned a standard shooter you buy in a box into a long-term hobby. It was almost a live service game before we really used that term.
Exactly. Before that, console shooters treated multiplayer like a simple arena you just jumped into. Modern Warfare gave you a reason, a hook, to keep playing for hundreds of hours. On top of that, Zampella's commitment to technical performance was just paramount. Sources suggest he was a huge advocate for making sure the game ran at a smooth 60 frames per second on consoles, which was really rare for a high-fidelity shooter back then. That dedication to how the game felt to play, combined with the psychological hook of the progression system, is what cemented Call of Duty as the dominant franchise.
It's clear he had this rare talent for combining technical excellence with, groundbreaking game design. But the source material suggests that even at this peak moment of success, the internal issues over creative control were already starting to cause problems. The seeds of that huge lawsuit were already there.
That's the perfect transition. That incredible level of success, the sheer amount of money they were generating, it created a situation where the creative architects felt their value was limitless, while the corporation felt it had to assert its absolute ownership.
This next part of his life, this is where the story really takes a dramatic turn. It becomes a textbook case of high-stakes corporate drama. The same success that defined their partnership with Activision ultimately led to it all blowing up. It resulted in one of the most famous and aggressive legal fights in modern entertainment.
Let's pin down the timing here and the financial trigger. The sources say it was just months after the massive launch of Modern Warfare 2 that Zampella and West were fired by Activision. Now, Activision's reason was insubordination and breach of contract, though the founders completely disputed this. The core of the conflict was immediate, and it was about money.
They were denied $36 million in bonuses and royalties they'd been expecting, which was tied directly to Modern Warfare 2's record-breaking sales. That denial was the spark that just ignited this huge legal firestorm.
And their response was immediate. It was calculated and unbelievably aggressive. Within the very same week they were fired, they sued Activision for wrongful termination, breach of contract, and fraud. This wasn't some quiet backroom negotiation. This was an instant declaration of war.
And what's really amazing, what shows their confidence and their value in the industry, is just how fast they made their next move. They founded Respawn Entertainment the very next month, in April of 2010. And they didn't just found it. They immediately got a major deal with Activision's biggest rival, Electronic Arts, to publish their next game.
Just think about that speed. Fired by one giant, engaged in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against them, and then signing a deal with the other major giant, EA, the same company that had sort of pushed Zampella out from Medal of Honor years earlier, all within about 30 days. It says so much about their reputation as hitmakers.
That immediate pivot just underscores that the real conflict wasn't about whether they were capable. It was about who controlled what they created. No matter the legal mess, the industry knew that Vince Zampella was a source of blockbuster games.
And the legal battle that followed was long and incredibly complicated. It dominated gaming news for years. It started with that $36 million claim, but Zampella and West, they quickly escalated their demands. They ended up pursuing claims against the publisher that led to them demanding a staggering $1 billion in damages from Activision.
That figure, $1 billion, it was strategic. It wasn't just about the withheld bonuses. It was about the alleged value of the intellectual property that Activision supposedly took from them. That included the right to keep developing the Modern Warfare story. The suit claimed Activision had planned their termination just to avoid paying those bonuses and to seize control of their future work.
And it wasn't just the two of them. Our sources point out that other former Infinity Ward employees also joined the lawsuit. It created this big group of plaintiffs against the publisher, all alleging similar contract breaches and denied pay. That showed just how widespread the internal fallout from Activision's decision really was.
And while the main suit never got a public verdict that detailed exactly what Zampella and West got, it was settled out of court, the financial outcome was definitely significant. The sources do confirm that Activision paid $42 million to the other ex-Infinity Ward employees who had joined the suit.
Right. And for Zampella and West themselves, the materials say they received a settlement thought to be in the tens of millions of dollars. Crucially, it wasn't just about the money. The settlement secured their creative freedom, and it gave Respawn Entertainment the financial foundation it needed to start work on Titanfall. So they didn't just survive this corporate war, they used it as a massive springboard, both professionally and financially.
This whole legal saga is a huge part of Zampella's legacy. It really proves his resilience. However, that partnership that had defined his success, the creative duo of him and Jason West, it eventually changed. The materials show that Jason West left Respawn in March of 2013, which was before they even released their first major game.
West's departure essentially left Zampella as the sole leader, the sole visionary to guide the studio forward. And this shift, it really marked the beginning of the next and equally successful part of his career, where he had to prove that his success wasn't just tied to that original partnership, but was really inherent to his own singular vision and leadership.
Right. If the first half of Zampella's career was defined by creating the modern military shooter at Infinity Ward, the legacy of structure, of progression, this next chapter at Respawn was all about creative diversification and risk-taking. It was a legacy of innovation. He proved that his vision could work across totally new games and genres.
Let's look at Respawn's first big releases. The studio launched 2 Titanfall games, and they were a dramatic step away from the military shooters he was known for. These games are seen as highly inventive because they focus so heavily on movement wall running, double jumping, speed, and blending that with giant mech combat.
The whole design philosophy behind Titanfall was revolutionary. It took that tight, 60 frames per second gunplay that Zampella championed at Call of Duty and grafted this whole new vertical parkour-style movement system onto it. The sources note it was a huge risk, creating an engine that could handle that mix of fast, fluid infantry movement and the slower, heavier, but devastating mech combat. The games proved that Zampella's team wasn't just going to rehash old ideas, they were actively innovating in areas like traversal and combat rhythm.
And this period of independent, innovation-focused work eventually led to the next big corporate step. Electronic Arts, the publisher that gave Respawn its start, acquired the studio in November of 2017. This acquisition put Zampella back inside a massive corporate structure, but Unlike his time at Activision, this time he had way more creative, executive, and financial power. The relationship was built on trust and a proven track record.
Exactly. And under EA's full ownership, Respawn really hit its stride. They delivered this sequence of massive industry giants, and this incredible run of successful releases shows Zampella's ability to pivot between totally different types of development, from a successful new IP to handling one of the world's biggest licensed properties.
We have to highlight Apex Legends. This was a huge, immediate success in the Battle Royale genre. It launched as a surprise in 2019 and has been a dominant force ever since. It's an IP that directly used the movement mechanics from Titanfall, but it translated them into that sprawling, highly competitive Battle Royale format.
What made Apex Legends work so well, according to analysis, wasn't just the tight gunplay, which you'd expect from Zampella's team. It was the innovative design decisions. They created the Legends system, which brought hero shooter elements into the Battle Royale format. But the single most important innovation was the ping system. This system allowed for complex, contextual communication without ever needing to use a mic. It set a new standard for accessibility and teamwork in the genre. It was a brilliant solution to a huge multiplayer problem.
And at the same time as that massively successful live service, free-to-play Battle Royale, Respawn also delivered these highly praised cinematic action-adventure games, Star Wars Jedi, Fallen Order, and then its sequel, Star Wars Jedi: Survivor.
That combination just shows a level of management and creative versatility that very few executives have. To manage the simultaneous demands of a constantly evolving live service giant like Apex and a high-budget, story-driven, single-player series using one of the most valuable licenses in the world, Star Wars, that just says so much about the vision and the structure Zampella built at Respawn.
But his role wasn't just limited to what Respawn was making. The materials show Zampella's influence grew a lot within EA's executive structure. It confirms that they believed in his ability to stabilize and improve other teams. In January 2020, EA announced that Zampella would take on another leadership role, heading the Los Angeles branch of DICE, the famous Swedish studio known for the Battlefield series.
This was a clear signal that EA trusted his vision, not just creatively, but operationally. The sources note a subtle but important change that followed. DICE LA was eventually renamed Ripple Effects Studios in July 2021. This move was part of a bigger corporate strategy to kind of decouple the LA branch from the Stockholm headquarters, maybe give the team more autonomy and its own identity under Zampella's guidance.
And this all leads to a really significant high-stakes promotion in 2021. Following what the sources very politely call the challenging launch of Battlefield 2042, and after the general manager of DICE left, Zampella was promoted to executive vice president within EA.
We should probably look at why that launch was challenging and why Zampella was the answer. The sources describe Battlefield 2042's reception as difficult because of significant technical problems at launch and some controversial design choices, like the specialist system. A lot of longtime fans felt that system compromised the traditional class structure of the franchise. The series needed a steady hand and a clear direction to stabilize it.
So the promotion put him in charge of the entire Battlefield franchise. This shows the final, crucial evolution in his career. He wasn't just a studio head leading his own creation anymore. He was a top-tier executive, a steward, responsible for fixing and directing one of the company's biggest but struggling franchises. This executive role over Battlefield, on top of his creative oversight of Respawn, it solidified his position as one of the most powerful and influential figures in global game development. It's a move from creative genius to a corporate firefighter.
It's the ultimate validation of his whole career. The man who started as a handyman and was effectively pushed out of Activision was now being handed the keys to fix a rival franchise that was in chaos. It just confirms that the industry understood Zampella's leadership was synonymous with both innovation and stability.
As we move on to discuss the personal details of his life, which are, important for understanding the man behind this incredible career, it's worth noting a detail from a 2001 interview. Early in his career, Zampella described himself as having always been an avid computer user and gamer.
It's important to remember that. It's easy to focus on the corporate drama and the billions in revenue, but the foundation was just pure passion for games. According to that same interview from 2001, he was a casual Counter-Strike player at the time, which fits perfectly with the kind of competitive military shooters he would go on to create. His passion was clearly rooted in his own enjoyment of games, which informed that relentless push for tight, responsive gameplay.
And regarding his family life, the sources note that Zampella and his wife Brigitte had 3 children together. The materials also mention that Brigitte filed for divorce in 2015. These details give us the context of a family man balancing an incredibly high-pressure, high-stakes career, which must have been just immensely challenging during the peak of that corporate conflict and the founding of Respawn.
And now we must turn to the facts regarding his tragic and sudden passing. We need to maintain a sympathetic and factual tone here, as the sources demand.
The materials report that Vincent Walter Zampella II died on December 21st, 2025. He was 55 years old.
The details of the incident provided in the sources are specific, and they are devastating. Zampella was driving a 2026 Ferrari 296 GTS. The vehicle veered off the road and struck a concrete barrier at a high rate of speed as it was exiting a tunnel. This happened on the Angeles Crest Highway, which is a winding mountainous road known for being very challenging to drive, located north of Los Angeles.
The sources confirmed the devastating outcome. The high-speed impact caused the vehicle to then catch fire. And compounding the tragedy, a passenger in the vehicle was ejected during the crash and also died. We extend our sincerest and deepest sympathy for this tragic loss of life for both Vince Zampella and his passenger.
The immediate reaction from the global video game industry was profound. It was swift, and it reflected the genuine depth of his influence across all competitive and corporate lines. Multiple major organizations released statements, and they really underscore the universal respect that he commanded across the entire gaming world.
Electronic Arts, the company where he was an executive and where Respawn is, released a detailed statement. They called Zampella a friend, colleague, leader, and visionary creator. They emphasized that his influence on the video game industry was profound and far-reaching, and noted his commitment to creative excellence inspired countless developers.
The response from his former and rival studios was maybe the most telling testament to his impact. Infinity Ward, the studio he co-founded and later had a legal battle with, released a statement honoring his memory. They recognized that his legacy of creating iconic, lasting entertainment is immeasurable and offered condolences to his family. That acknowledgement, despite the dramatic split years before, it just speaks volumes about the lasting quality of his work.
And Treyarch, another major studio in the Call of Duty world and a direct competitor to his original team, stated they were deeply saddened by Vince Zampella's tragic passing. They specifically noted that his legacy as one of the founders of Call of Duty and a legend of our industry will never be forgotten. The sources also noted specific public statements from the official social media accounts for Battlefield, for Respawn, and for Apex Legends, all showing this immediate, widespread, collective grief and honor paid to his legacy.
The sheer breadth of those tributes confirms that Zampella's career went beyond just business numbers. He was instrumental in building culture and setting creative standards that are still present across multiple publishers and genres. He literally defined what a modern shooter should feel like to play.
So, to bring this examination to a close, what we've really explored today is a unique career defined by duality, by resilience. Zampella was a true pioneer who helped establish the modern military shooter with Medal of Honor and, most importantly, with Call of Duty, one of the most successful entertainment franchises in history.
And then, he successfully navigated a massive corporate conflict and, through just sheer force of will, used his creative value to build a second powerhouse studio, Respawn Entertainment. And this second act was responsible for major modern IPs like Apex Legends, which became a cornerstone of its genre, and successfully revitalized licensed game development with the Star Wars Jedi series.
To cap it all off, he made that final transition from creative founder to high-level executive, stepping into the crucial role of executive vice president at EA, taking charge of the massive Battlefield franchise. His career path is a clear illustration of resilience and singular vision. It's a rarity in the high-stakes video game industry. Very few people successfully found two companies that define two different eras of a medium, especially after challenging the biggest player in that medium.
It is a singular achievement. His ability to pivot from the structured military shooter of Call of Duty to the futuristic, movement-focused innovation of Titanfall and Apex Legends, it just shows a mind that was constantly looking for the next evolutionary step in game design.
It makes you stop and reflect on the major creative directions he was steering just before he passed.
Indeed. We'd encourage you to consider how Zampella's dual legacies have fundamentally shaped the competitive landscape. On one hand, you have that classic boots-on-the-ground, progression-based shooter that Call of Duty established. On the other, you have the vertical, high-speed, ability-focused gameplay of Titanfall and Apex. These two philosophies now define the rivalry between the two biggest publishers in gaming. So the final thought to leave you with is this. What does the future creative direction now look like for the major franchises he oversaw? Particularly Battlefield, given the significant executive role he had just taken on to stabilize and redefine its direction. That specific influence, which was poised to reshape one of gaming's biggest franchises, will certainly be felt and arguably missed for years to come.
Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look at the life and legacy of Vince Zampella.
Thanks for listening.